At his lavish wedding, a red-haired girl with emerald eyes interrupts the ceremony, claiming the CEO is her father. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Leonard Harrington's life had always been measured in big deals and grand gestures, yet on this particular day, he found himself more nervous than ever before. It was his wedding day, an event that the entire city of Boston seemed to anticipate with avid curiosity. Newspapers ran headlines about his remarkable success as the CEO of Harrington Innovations, a multinational tech empire, but that was only half of the story. The other half was unfolding right now inside a lavish ballroom adorned with glimmering chandeliers and breathtaking floral arrangements. Rows of polished white chairs faced an ornate altar, while a string quartet played gentle melodies in the background. In the middle of all this splendor, Leonard stood tall, adjusting the cuffs of his pristine tuxedo, his heart pounding louder than the music. Everything was perfect, from the elaborate flower arches to the crystal flutes awaiting a celebratory toast. It seemed as though no detail had been overlooked. Journalists hovered discreetly in the corridors, eager to snap photographs that would dominate tomorrow's front pages. All these years, Leonard had cultivated an image of flawless composure, a man who thrived under the weight of responsibility and challenge. Yet here, at the threshold of saying his vows to Camille Lockwood, an accomplished attorney with a brilliant smile, he felt a tremor of vulnerability. He glanced around, catching the eye of his best friend and business partner Samuel, who stood as his best man. Samuel offered a reassuring nod, but even that small gesture couldn't dispel the knot in Leonard's stomach. He inhaled deeply, forcing a steady composure. He had faced corporate takeovers and expansions, negotiated international partnerships, and soared through the ranks of elite business circles. Yet the notion of marriage, this profound personal alliance, was a different challenge altogether. Love had its own uncertainties, its own unpredictable tides. He checked his watch. 15 minutes until the ceremony was scheduled to begin. Soon he would be standing before friends, family, and of course the media that had always tracked his life with insatiable interest. He felt a rush of mixed emotion, excitement threaded with faint apprehension. A wedding was supposed to be the start of something beautiful. But in the midst of that swirling hope, a strange tension gripped him. It felt like standing on the edge of a new world without a map. His heart refused steady compliance. The orchestra's gentle transition signaled that the bridal party would soon make their entrance. Leonard straightened his jacket and moved toward the aisle. On either side, guests murmured with anticipation, elegantly dressed in glamorous suits and gowns. He recognized politicians, influential CEOs, and old classmates from Harvard, all gathered to witness his big day. But as he stood there, waiting for Camille to appear in her white gown, a flicker of movement at the far end of the hall caught his attention. At first, he dismissed it as a late-arriving guest. Then he noticed the small figure in a simple blue dress standing near the towering doors. A girl, no older than 10, her vibrant red hair glinting under the ornate lighting, her face damp with tears. She stood motionless, trembling slightly. Something about the child's distress tugged at Leonard's attention more forcefully than the swirling excitement around him. He found himself taking a step away from the aisle, ignoring the perplexed stares of guests. The ceremony was seconds from beginning, but he couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that he needed to help. The girl's eyes seemed to lock onto him from across the distance. Her tears glistened under the glow of the chandeliers, and she clutched a small rectangular object close to her chest. Leonard hesitated, torn between fulfilling his wedding obligations and the inexplicable urge to approach her. Though time ticked forward, he felt caught in a suspended moment where the opulence and formality of his wedding threatened to eclipse a fragile plea for solace. Exhaled, heart pounding with uncertainty, Without waiting for the processional to start, Leonard pivoted on his polished shoes and walked toward the girl. A hush rippled through the crowd, confusion evident on their faces. Even Samuel tried to catch Leonard's eye as if to say, "What are you doing?" But Leonard kept going, drawn by a force he couldn't name. He approached the child and knelt to her level, his voice low so as not to startle her. "Are you okay?" he asked. Up close, her red hair framed pale cheeks streaked with tears, and there was a desperation in her gaze that made his chest tighten. I need to speak with you," she murmured, each word trembling on her lips. "Please, it's important." Leonard's pulse thundered, a surge of protectiveness stirring inside him. Behind him, the music faltered, and the gathered guests shifted uneasily. This was not the poised businessman they recognized, the man who remained unruffled in boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations. Instead, it was someone unexpectedly tender, bending down to hear a child's trembling request. "What's your name?" he asked softly. The girl swallowed hard. "Rose," she whispered, tears threatening to spill once more. Leonard offered a gentle nod. "Rose, you're safe here. Whatever you need, you can tell me." Her gaze flickered over the glamorous hall, the hundreds of eyes discreetly watching, and she bit her lip. With a shaky breath, she lifted the small rectangle she'd been clutching. It was a photograph, crumpled at the edges. Rose's voice wavered. "I've been looking for you. Dad." Leonard felt the world quake. An audible gasp spread among the guests as the word "Dad" echoed in the hushed ballroom. Leonard's knees threatened to buckle. He stared at the photograph, his mind struggling to reconcile this reality. The image depicted a much younger Leonard, perhaps a decade earlier. His hair was shorter, his expression carefree, and beside him stood a woman with the same fiery red hair as Rose. They looked happy, arms wrapped around each other as if they had the entire future ahead of them. Leonard felt his breath catch. He knew this woman, Beatrice Collins, a brilliant but free-spirited photographer he had dated before his company took off. They had parted ways suddenly. He never knew she was pregnant. He swallowed, voice cracking. Where is your mother?" Terror and hope coiled. Rose's chin quivered as she clutched the photograph tighter. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. She passed away a few months ago." The weight of those words crashed into Leonard like a physical blow. The entire hall seemed to fade. No guests, no wedding, no music, just the ache in Rose's eyes. He wanted to ask how, why, and when, but the grief etched on the girl's face told him enough. She had lost her mother, and in that turmoil, she had come seeking him. "I'm sorry," he managed, his throat raw with emotion. Gently, he reached for her hand, realizing only then how deeply this moment would alter the course of his life. "Rose, I didn't know. I swear I didn't." A hush enveloped them, radiating outward. He wished he could pause time and find the right words, but the reality of the wedding pressed in. The officiant stood in stunned silence, and Camille, radiant in her gown, appeared at the far entrance. Her expression shifted from hopeful anticipation to astonishment as she took in the scene. Leonard crouched beside a tearful child with vivid red hair, the photo of him and an old flame in her small hand. In one irrevocable instant, everything changed. The cameras flashed, capturing the confusion on the guests' faces and the vulnerability in Leonard's eyes. Yet none of that mattered compared to the fragile presence of Rose, whose uncertain future dangled in the balance. Leonard drew a shaky breath, realizing that nothing, no vow, no business deal, could ever be the same again. Before going on, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Leonard remained crouched there, his hand trembling around Rose's small fingers, aware that hundreds of eyes were fixed on them. For so many years, he had maintained a carefully cultivated image of poise and absolute authority. Yet now, he stood at the center of a personal earthquake. He gazed into Rose's anxious face, hearing her ragged breaths echo in the hush of the room. Almost unconsciously, he squeezed her hand, as if to anchor them both. From the far end of the aisle, Camille finally regained enough composure to walk forward in her satin gown. Her expression was unreadable, though Leonard could see confusion etched into the corners of her eyes. The hush broke as people whispered among themselves, and even the photographers lowered their cameras in stunned fascination. This was no ordinary glitch at a society wedding. This was a revelation that might destroy everything Leonard had thought was stable. Camille paused beside them, carefully lifting her lace train so it wouldn't drag across the polished marble floor. She looked at Rose, then at Leonard. "Is this someone you know?" Her voice faltered, uncertain whether to feel threatened or sympathetic. Leonard tried to stand, but his legs felt stiff. He cleared his throat. "Camille, this is Rose," he said, feeling the significance of each word as it slid from his mouth. "Her mother was someone I dated long ago. I had no idea there was a child." The glimmer in Camille's gaze shifted from shock to a guarded sort of compassion. She bent down, meeting Rose's eyes. "Rose, are you all right?" she asked gently. Rose shrank back, biting her lip. She glanced at Camille's wedding dress as though worried she might be interrupting something sacred. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to ruin anything, I just—" Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes again, and Leonard's heart tightened. He slipped an arm around her shoulders, ignoring the quiet gasps from the guests. "You're not ruining anything," he said, voice tightening with emotion. "You surprised me." He looked back at Camille, whose composure remained incredible. "Perhaps we should, step aside for a moment." A murmur of agreement passed through those around them, and Samuel, noticing the tension, hurried over. He gestured for the guests to remain calm, then signaled to the string quartet to halt their music entirely. The resulting silence pressed down like a physical weight. Camille lifted her chin, trying to salvage dignity for both of them. "Let's go to the side room," she murmured, her voice carrying authority. "We can take a moment to talk." She turned to the officiant and forced a polite smile. "I'm terribly sorry. Let us pause the ceremony for just a short while." An uneasy flutter rippled through the audience, but nobody rose to leave. Suspense hung in the air. As Leonard led Rose away, he caught glimpses of disbelieving faces, some of them sympathetic, others waiting for a more dramatic collapse. This wedding was now teetering on the brink of fiasco. He inhaled, trying to steady his breathing. "It's going to be all right," he muttered to Rose, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring her or himself. In a small adjacent salon adorned with gilded mirrors, plush chairs, and a single ornate chandelier, Leonard settled Rose onto a velvet sofa. Camille closed the door behind them, blocking out the faint murmurs from the ballroom. Samuel hovered near the threshold, uncertain whether to step inside. When Leonard gave him a subtle nod, he quietly entered and shut the door with a click. No one spoke at first, as if each breath needed to be counted. Rose's tiny shoulders trembled. Leonard crouched in front of her, brushing a tear from her cheek with surprising gentleness. He realized his own heart pounded in his ears. "Rose," he said softly, "you must have been so scared. How did you get here?" She clutched that photograph again, the edges worn from constant handling. She took a shaky breath. "I ran away from the group home. After my mom died, they placed me there." She cast a quick glance at Camille, then at Samuel, as though afraid they might scold her. Her gaze fluttered back to Leonard. "I had this picture of you and my mom. On the back, she wrote your name and said you lived in Boston. I found out there was a big wedding at Harrington Hall, and I heard your name on the news. So She trailed off, uncertain whether to continue. Leonard felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Heartbreak for the child's loss, confusion about Beatrice's decisions, and guilt for being unaware that any of this had happened. "When did your mother pass?" he asked quietly. Rose's lip quivered. 3 months ago. She got really sick, and by the time I realized how bad it was too late. Leonard closed his eyes. The reality of Beatrice's death struck him deeply, rekindling memories of her laughter, her spontaneous spirit, her vibrant photography exhibits. She had been the one person he knew who lived wholeheartedly in the moment, never bowing to the demands of others. They had parted when life pulled them in separate directions. But now he had a daughter, and she was alone in the world. "She never told me," Leonard murmured. I wish I had known." The words felt impossibly small compared to the immensity of the revelation. Camille stepped forward then, still impeccably poised in her ivory gown. She had every right to be outraged, hurt, or humiliated, but something gentler shone in her eyes. "Rose," she said, keeping her voice calm, "I'm sorry about your mother. You must have loved her very much." The girl nodded. "And I'm sorry if this is all overwhelming. This day was supposed to be about Leonard and me, but obviously we need to figure out what's best for you now." Samuel shifted from foot to foot, clearing his throat. "Leonard, do you want me to manage the guests? They're probably getting restless." Leonard glanced at Camille. "How do we even continue with the ceremony?" The question came out strained, weighed down by a deeper subtext. Was it even right to proceed with vows under these circumstances? Camille inhaled, her expression flickering with sorrow, then resolution. She set a hand gently on Leonard's arm. "We can't act like nothing happened. This changes everything." Her gaze briefly flicked to Rose. "But we need to think carefully about what it changes for us and for her." Rose swallowed, fiddling with the hem of her dress. She seemed on the verge of tears again, uncertain if she'd inadvertently shattered Leonard's life. "I just wanted to find you," she said, voice trembling. "I didn't know you were getting married. I don't want to ruin it." Leonard's chest felt tight. The paternal instinct rose powerfully inside him, an unfamiliar but unignorable urge to protect this child. "Rose, you're not ruining anything," he managed. "Whatever else happens today, I'm grateful you told me the truth. I'm grateful you came." He shifted, glancing at Camille with an uncertain expression. The silence stretched, broken only by the ticking of an antique clock. Then Camille released a slow breath. "Leonard, let's do this. Samuel can address the guests and let them know there's a delay. We'll figure out what to say in a moment. Meanwhile, let's take a little time here." She stood smoothing the folds of her gown, the image of composure despite the emotional storm inside. "I'll have someone escort Rose to a quiet place, maybe an office or a suite upstairs where she can rest while you and I handle the chaos." Rose stiffened. Leonard rubbed her shoulder. "We'll just be a minute," he said gently. "I promise. All right?" "All right," Rose murmured, her voice so small it tugged at Leonard's heartstrings. She stood and slid off the sofa, still clutching the photograph. Samuel offered his arm with a gentle smile, and though Rose looked hesitant, she allowed him to guide her toward the door. As they left, she glanced over her shoulder, searching Leonard's face for some promise of stability. Leonard gave a subtle nod, trying to convey reassurance he didn't fully feel. Then the door clicked shut, and he was alone with Camille in the hush of the gilded salon. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Camille stood near a tall mirror, the train of her wedding gown fanning around her like a cloud. She looked regal, heartbreakingly beautiful, and utterly uncertain. Her hands toyed with the delicate lace at her waist, a trembling gesture that betrayed the inner whirlwind she was concealing. Leonard took a tentative step forward, hands loosely at his sides, not sure whether to reach for her or keep his distance. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I know this isn't how today was supposed to go." Camille inhaled as though searching for calm. "I'm not upset with you for having a past," she began, voice carefully measured. "Everyone does, it's just, this child's appearance is so sudden. We both had plans for how our life would start as a married couple. Now everything feels uncertain." Leonard's throat constricted. He could imagine her thoughts unraveling in a spiral of confusion. Only an hour ago, the biggest question had been whether the floral arrangements matched perfectly with the table settings. Now they faced an entirely different kind of dilemma, one that threatened to reshape their future. "I knew Beatrice years ago," he murmured, eyes drifting to the ornate pattern on the carpet. "We broke up. I went on to build Harrington Innovations, and she vanished from my life. I never knew she was pregnant. If I had, I would have..." He trailed off. What exactly could he claim? That he would have stepped up, that he would have rearranged his life? He wasn't sure. That was a younger version of himself, a man still driven by ambition. Maybe he'd have done the right thing, or maybe the allure of success would have blinded him. The question weighed heavier now that he had seen Rose's sad, determined eyes. Camille lifted her gaze to meet his. "I believe you," she said. "But this isn't just about the past, it's about what happens next. She lost her mother, Leonard. She has no one else. Obviously, she came here because she's desperate." Leonard nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. Outside, faint murmurs seeped through the walls. The guests were undoubtedly gossiping, snapping pictures, or refreshing their social media feeds. Word of an unexpected daughter at a billionaire's wedding would spread like wildfire. But none of that pressed on him as hard as the thought of Rose, scared, alone, and clinging to a father she'd never met. Yes, she needs help, a place to live, people she can trust. Camille's lips thinned. "Does that mean you're going to take her in?" "I don't see what else I can do," Leonard admitted. "I can't turn my back on her. She's my daughter." The simple truth of that statement echoed in the quiet salon. Silence fell between them, weighted with enormous implications. Camille smoothed her gown, as though each careful movement could distract her from the uncertainty. "Then we need to figure out how that fits into us." She swallowed hard, her composure cracking. "I love you, Leonard, but this changes the entire trajectory of our marriage. We wanted children in the future, not at this exact moment, and certainly not under these circumstances." Leonard's eyes flickered with regret. "I know. I wish there was a simpler path. But we can't ignore reality." He stepped closer, noting the strain in her face. "Maybe we don't have to decide everything right this instant. Right now, we have an entire ballroom of people waiting." Camille pressed trembling fingers to her forehead. "You're right. We need to address them. But what are we even going to say?" Her voice quavered with emotion. "Should we call off the wedding? Or should we just postpone it?" A wave of guilt crested inside Leonard. Camille deserved a day of celebration, untainted by scandal or heartbreak. Yet fate had intervened in the starkest possible way. "I don't want to force you into anything," he said, voice tight. "If you need time, if we need to postpone, I'll support that. Our relationship matters more than any public image or fancy ceremony." She closed her eyes, inhaling slowly. When she opened them, her expression was resolute, if pained. "Let's postpone the ceremony. We can't just pretend everything's normal. It wouldn't be right for Rose, and it wouldn't be right for us." Her decision landed with a gentle finality, and Leonard felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. He placed a hand on her cheek, and she allowed it, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Thank you for understanding," he whispered. I know this is hard. Camille leaned into his touch for the briefest moment. Let's handle the guests, she said, pulling back. They can celebrate without a formal wedding, at least for tonight. A shaky laugh escaped her lips. It's going to be a PR nightmare, but we'll manage. Nodding, Leonard slipped an arm around her waist, guiding her toward the door. Out in the corridor, the hush swelled again. They made their way back into the ballroom, where the curious faces of friends, colleagues, and media swiveled to meet them. In their hands, some clutched cameras while others fidgeted with programs. Samuel, standing on a small stage near the quartet, exhaled with visible relief when he saw them approach. Leonard gently released Camille and strode to the center of the aisle, clearing his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice echoing in the vast chamber. I'm sorry for the unexpected delay. Something very important has come up, and as a result, Camille and I have decided to postpone the ceremony for now. A muffled gasp swept the crowd. He saw confusion and worry flicker across the many faces, business associates, distant relatives, political dignitaries. Yet he pushed on. We appreciate your love and support. Please enjoy the reception tonight as our guests. We only ask for your understanding and kindness as we navigate a personal matter. He glanced at Camille, who stood regal as ever, though heartbreak glistened in her eyes. She stepped forward, voice resonating with calm authority. We are grateful for everyone who traveled far to be here. We hope you'll still enjoy the food, the music, and each other's company. We will make a statement later when we are ready. In the charged silence, Samuel nodded at the string quartet, who began playing a soft, diffused waltz to lift the tension. People slowly stirred, uncertain whether to offer congratulations or condolences. In hushed tones, they began to file toward the banquet area, glancing back over their shoulders. Leonard guided Camille off to one side where a small dais overlooked the hall. How are you holding up? He asked, placing a hand on the curve of her elbow. Camille exhaled, lips drawn thin. I'll manage. Right now you should go check on Rose. He hesitated. Are you sure? I don't want to leave you alone in the midst of, this. She patted his hand. I'm a Lockwood, remember? I know how to handle a crowd. Besides, Rose needs you more than anyone else does right now. The acceptance in her expression might have been shaky, but it was real enough to propel him forward. With one last glance, he slipped away from the crowd and headed to the suite where Samuel had taken Rose. He found them in an upstairs lounge that overlooked a sweeping view of the gardens beyond. Rose sat curled in a velvet armchair, her small face pale with exhaustion, while Samuel kept a respectful distance near the window. At the sight of Leonard, Rose bolted upright. Is everything okay? She asked in a timid voice. Leonard approached slowly. We decided to postpone the wedding, he said gently. My fiancée Camille needs some time, and I do too. But none of that is your fault. Understand? Rose hung her head. I feel bad. You were about to get married, and then I messed it all up. Immediately, Leonard knelt beside the chair. No, he said firmly. You did not mess up anything. You're my daughter, and I'm the one who owes you an apology for not knowing about you. I can't imagine how scary it must have been to leave the group home and come here alone. Her lower lip quivered. It was, she admitted. I had some money saved from Mom's things, so I took a bus. And when I got to Boston, someone told me about your wedding. I was worried if I didn't find you right away, I'd never see you. Leonard's heart clenched. Rose, he murmured, placing a hand on her arm. That was so brave. I just wish it wasn't necessary. But now that you found me, I promise you won't be alone again. Whatever needs to happen, we'll figure it out. She looked up, meeting his gaze, searching for any hint of deception. Finding none, she nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Gently, Leonard reached to brush them away, noticing how fragile her shoulders felt beneath his touch. It struck him that this was the first true paternal moment of his life, comforting a child who was simultaneously a stranger and a piece of him. Samuel cleared his throat softly. "Leonard, if there's anything I can do to help, just say the word." Leonard glanced back, thankful for Samuel's steadiness. "Actually, can you arrange for a room here at the hotel? Something private and quiet for Rose and me? I don't think taking her back to my penthouse tonight is the best idea. The press might already be outside." Samuel nodded. "On it." He stepped out, phone in hand, leaving them alone. Rose toyed with the edge of the photograph that showed her mother. "She told me about you sometimes," she murmured. "She said you were really smart and really busy. I guess she was afraid, or something. I don't know. She wouldn't talk about it much." Leonard sighed, mind sifting through old memories. "Beatrice was always independent," he said. "Maybe she thought she'd manage on her own, or maybe she worried I wouldn't make a good father." Bitterness laced his tone, though he felt more sorrow than anger. Rose stayed quiet, lost in her own swirl of emotions. At length, she asked the one question that had been quietly looming. "What happens now?" Leonard hesitated, not wanting to make grand promises he couldn't fulfill. "First, we'll make sure you have everything you need. Clothes, comfort, someone to talk to. Then we'll figure out how to move forward, maybe with school, maybe with a more permanent arrangement. But one thing's certain, you won't go back to a place where you feel alone or unsafe." Rose nodded, a ghost of a hopeful expression passing across her features. Yet a faint doubt still flickered in her gaze. Leonard recognized it as the doubt of someone who'd been disappointed by life too many times. He couldn't banish that with a few kind words, but he could try. "Let's get you settled in for tonight," he said gently. "Tomorrow, we'll decide our next steps. Camille might want to talk to you too, if that's all right." Rose shrugged as though it hardly mattered, but he saw the yearning in her eyes. For a mother figure, perhaps? Or just for some semblance of family? "Okay," she whispered. Moments later, Samuel returned, passing Leonard a hotel keycard. "Everything's ready," he said quietly. "A suite on the 9th floor, away from the press. We can send some dinner up if you like." Leonard thanked him, then offered Rose his hand. She slipped off the chair, still clinging to that photograph as though it were an anchor. Together, they walked through the opulent corridors, ignoring the curious stares of a few lingering guests. When they reached the elevator, Leonard pressed the button. As the doors slid shut, he felt Rose tremble slightly. Without thinking, he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, holding her gently. She leaned in just enough for him to sense the weight of her exhaustion. Tonight, everything had changed. The wedding was postponed, the future uncertain. Yet through the chaos, Leonard discovered a fragile thread that bound him to this girl. That thread demanded he become something more than a CEO with an immaculate reputation. He would have to learn how to be a father, no matter how unprepared he felt. Before going to next, please like, share, and subscribe. Leonard opened the door to the 9th floor suite, guiding Rose inside with a gentle hand on her shoulder. The space smelled faintly of fresh linens and citrus, a quiet contrast to the lingering floral aromas downstairs. Plush armchairs faced a large window, and a sleek glass table sat near a coffee station stocked with bottled water and snacks. Rose's eyes flitted around, cautious yet curious, as though any sudden movement might shatter this fragile moment of peace. Leonard could sense the swirl of questions churning in her mind, but for now she stayed silent, clutching the photograph so tightly that her knuckles whitened. He flicked on a lamp by the sofa, casting a warm glow across her tired features. "Make yourself at home. he murmured, hoping the words sounded comforting. He knew, of course, that calling this hotel sweet home was a stretch. Rose had come seeking something far deeper. Acceptance, belonging, perhaps even love. Yet he didn't know how to give her that overnight. Instead, he helped her set aside the few belongings she carried, a small backpack with frayed straps, onto a chair. "We can order room service," he offered softly, recalling she'd traveled hours without a decent meal. Rose nodded, though he detected worry in her eyes. "Is Camille mad at me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Leonard's chest tightened. "No, sweetheart," he said. "She's just overwhelmed. This was all very sudden and she needs time to take it in. But it's not your fault." As if uncertain, Rose cast her gaze down, fiddling with the photo in her hands. A brief knock came from the door. Leonard opened it to reveal Samuel carrying 2 small shopping bags. "Some essentials," he explained, stepping inside. "Toothbrush, pajamas, that sort of thing. The hotel staff is bringing dinner soon." He offered Rose a tentative smile. "Hi, kiddo. I'm Sam." She whispered a greeting, polite but subdued. Leonard watched as Samuel set the bags on the table, noticing how Rose seemed to gravitate behind Leonard, as though seeking protection. It pained him to realize she'd learned not to trust easily. "Thanks," Leonard said, giving his friend a grateful nod. Samuel nodded back, stepping aside so Leonard could retrieve the items. Soon, he pulled out a pair of soft pajamas, holding them up for Rose's approval. She managed a shy smile, which felt like progress. After Samuel departed, Leonard and Rose settled on the sofa. The city lights glimmered through the window, painting bright streaks across the dark sky. A soft buzz on Leonard's phone reminded him of the wedding chaos he'd left behind. Countless texts from colleagues, family members, and probably the media. He ignored them. Right now, Rose was his priority. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, reaching a hand toward her shoulder. She hesitated, then relaxed against him. "I'm really tired," she admitted. "Everything's happened so fast." The sadness in her tone made him ache with guilt. "We'll take it slow," he promised. "Tonight we'll just rest." For a moment they sat together in near silence, as though bracing for the emotional weight that tomorrow would undoubtedly bring. When the room service arrived, they ate in subdued calm. Grilled cheese sandwiches, a bowl of tomato soup, and a slice of chocolate cake Leonard suspected might brighten her mood. Rose picked at her sandwich, appetite dulled by weariness. Still, she managed a few bites before pushing the plate away. Leonard asked if she wanted the cake, and she gave a small nod. He sliced a piece and placed it before her, noticing how carefully she ate, as though unsure when her next meal might come. He wondered how many nights she had spent hungry, or how many times she'd worried about her mother's illness. "It's good," she murmured about the cake. Leonard smiled, filled with relief at her simple statement, as if it might kindle a tiny spark of normalcy. After dinner, Rose slipped into the pajamas that Samuel had brought. They were a size too big, but she didn't complain. Leonard turned on a low lamp in the bedroom portion of the suite, revealing crisp white linens and plush pillows on a king-sized bed. He watched her climb in gingerly, as if not wanting to disturb the covers. Sitting at the edge, he smoothed a hand over her hair. "If you need anything, I'm right here in the other room," he said, pointing to where he planned to sleep on a pull-out sofa. Rose nodded, her eyes dropping with exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered, voice barely audible. "You won't leave, right?" The vulnerability in that question cut him deeply, and he shook his head. "I'm not going anywhere," he said softly. She pressed the photograph beneath her pillow, eyes drifting closed. Leonard watched her slip toward sleep. He lingered by the bed for several minutes, grappling with a swirl of emotions: shock, guilt, protectiveness. Eventually, he eased away, returning to the suite's small living area. Without disturbing Rose, he dialed Camille's number. She picked up almost immediately, sounding exhausted. "Hey," she said. He swallowed, struggling for words. "I just wanted to see how you are." A pause stretched. "I'm dealing," she replied. "I'm at my parents' house. Reporters are everywhere, so I figured it was best to leave the hotel. Are you with Rose?" Leonard rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of the day's events. "Yes, she's asleep finally. I'm sorry about everything." Camille exhaled. "We'll talk more in the morning. Good night." Leonard ended the call, setting his phone aside. He felt drained, as though he'd just navigated a 6-hour board meeting. This was an entirely different kind of responsibility, one he wasn't sure he was equipped for. Yet the thought of Rose alone in the world galvanized him to try. So he prepared the pull-out sofa, draping a spare blanket over it. Lying down, he stared at the ceiling, the hum of the city seeping through the windows. His mind replayed a kaleidoscope of memories, glimpses of Beatrice's laughter, the flutter of her hair in the wind, their carefree early days. Then he pictured Rose's face, tearful and hopeful. Eventually, fatigue won, pulling him into a restless sleep that carried echoes of the day's upheaval. Morning arrived with a pale glow filtering through the curtains. Leonard stirred, momentarily disoriented by his unfamiliar sleeping arrangement. Then he remembered Rose. He got up quietly and peeked into the bedroom. She was still asleep, the photograph peeking from beneath her pillow. Her hair, that bright hue of red, splayed across the sheets. He shut the door gently, letting her rest. The day's next challenge loomed large. How would they move forward? His phone glowed with missed calls, and he expected to face the press at some point. But first, breakfast and ensuring Rose felt safe. Perhaps a trip to a nearby store for some new clothes. The paternal impulse that had ignited last night still flickered steadily. Whatever uncertainties plagued him, caring for her had become paramount. After a quick shower, Leonard ordered breakfast: scrambled eggs, toast, fruit, and a small pot of hot chocolate for Rose. When he returned to the living area, he found her awake, standing tentatively by the window. She clutched her arms as though unsure if she was allowed to be so close to the glass. "Good morning," he greeted, noticing her shy smile in return. "Hi," she murmured. Her gaze dropped to her pajamas, clearly aware they didn't fit quite right. Leonard suppressed a wave of sympathy. "I got us breakfast," he said. "We can eat, and then maybe we'll figure out what to do next." A flicker of anxiety crossed her face. "Okay," she said, stepping gingerly toward the small dining table. For a moment, normalcy emerged, an adult and a child sharing a meal. Leonard poured hot chocolate into a mug for her. She cupped it between her hands, inhaling the sweet aroma with a hesitant smile. "We'll go shopping," he offered. "Get you clothes that fit, maybe pick up anything else you need." Rose looked at him, cautious gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "But what about Camille?" The question lingered, and Leonard wondered how best to explain an adult relationship shift to a 10-year-old. "We're going to talk today," he said carefully. "She's just processing. This was a lot for her, and for me too. But whatever happens, I'm here for you." She nodded, as though somewhat reassured. They finished breakfast in quiet bites, and he couldn't help noticing how she savored every morsel, as if still unsure when normal life might vanish again. After they set the dishes aside, Leonard checked the local news on his phone. Sure enough, headlines blared about the postponed wedding, speculations swirling that it was canceled altogether. Paparazzi photos of Rose's tear-streaked face were already making rounds online, accompanied by wild theories. He set the phone down, inhaling to calm the anger sparked by those invasive images. Rose looked up, noticing his frown. "Is it bad?" she asked, voice quiet. Leonard tried a reassuring smile. "We'll handle it," he said. "Don't worry." She pressed her lips together, seeming unconvinced, yet she let the subject drop. Resolving to protect her from the media frenzy, Leonard contacted hotel security to ensure their discreet exit later. Perhaps they could slip through a side entrance, avoiding the glare of cameras for as long as possible. Standing, Rose cleared her throat. "I'm ready," she said, fiddling with the oversized pajama sleeves. Leonard opened the closet, retrieving the clothes she arrived in, now neatly folded. They were creased and stained in places, a glaring sign of the hardships she'd faced. "We'll grab something new soon," he promised, handing them over. She changed in the bathroom and he stepped aside, giving her privacy. As he waited, a tangle of hope and fear churned in his stomach. He was about to guide her into a world that might judge her harshly, but he vowed to ensure her safety. After a moment, the door opened. Rose emerged, hair brushed, wearing yesterday's clothes. She tugged awkwardly at the shirt hem. "I'm ready," she repeated, lifting her gaze with a tentative spark of trust. "Before going to next, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel." Leonard took one last glance around the hotel suite to make sure they hadn't left anything behind. The remains of breakfast lay on a room service cart, and the bed where Rose had slept remained rumpled, a reminder of how quickly their worlds had collided. Sliding his phone into his pocket, he guided Rose toward the corridor with a gentle hand on her shoulder. She clutched the frayed straps of her backpack, her gaze darting over the plush carpeting and elegant light fixtures. It was clear she wasn't used to such opulence, and the uncertainty in her posture made his heart lurch again with the desire to protect her. He had spoken with the head of hotel security a few minutes earlier. They would exit through a side service door, where a car was already waiting. The news outlets knew he was somewhere in this building, but for now, he could avoid the worst of the media horde. He hoped to spare Rose from the glare of flashing cameras, at least until he decided how to handle the press. The day after the canceled, or rather postponed, wedding had dawned gray and chilly, as though the skies themselves carried the tension of what lay ahead. Stepping into a narrow hallway typically reserved for employees, Leonard felt Rose's fingers tighten on his sleeve. He offered what he hoped was a reassuring nod, and she nodded back, glancing warily at the industrial walls that contrasted with the hotel's usual luxury. The security guard led them through a maze of storage areas and staff offices, eventually emerging at a metal door that opened onto a quiet loading zone. There waited an unmarked black car, engine softly humming. The driver, a discreet older man Leonard trusted, opened the rear door. Rose slid in first and Leonard followed, shutting the door behind them. He exhaled, tension easing slightly now that they were out of the public eye. "We'll go straight to a clothing store," he told the driver. "Nothing flashy, just something practical." Then turning to Rose, he added in a gentler tone, "We'll get you a few outfits, maybe some shoes. After that, maybe we can find a quiet place for lunch. Sound good?" She nodded, face still etched with a guarded expression. It struck Leonard that he had no idea what she liked, favorite colors, styles, or anything else that might define her personality. He knew only that she was his daughter, that her mother had passed away, and that she'd taken a bus to find him. The rest was an ocean of unknowns. He reminded himself that trust wasn't built overnight. He'd have to learn who she was day by day, just as she was learning about him. The drive passed without incident, the city's towering buildings sliding by the tinted windows. Rain began to patter softly, streaking the glass and casting the streets in a muted haze. Rose watched the droplets race down the window, occasionally glancing at Leonard with uncertainty, as though not entirely sure of her place at his side. He wondered how many times she had braced herself for disappointment in her short life. He intended to ensure that from now on she would have something more stable. They arrived at a modest shopping plaza on the outskirts of downtown, far from the luxury boutiques that dotted the more exclusive areas. Leonard had chosen it deliberately. He didn't want paparazzi to guess where they might be. Also, he doubted Rose would feel comfortable amid the glitz of high fashion stores. The driver dropped them off beneath an awning, and they slipped inside a department store with racks of casual clothing and a few scattered shoppers who paid them little mind. Rose looked around, eyeing the bright lights and tidy displays of jeans, sweaters, and jackets. The overhead music was cheerful, if tinny. "Pick anything that catches your eye," Leonard encouraged, trying to sound upbeat. She lingered uncertainly, then fingered the sleeve of a simple gray hoodie. He grabbed a cart, telling himself not to worry about the cost. Far from it, he wanted to make sure she had clothes that were truly hers, not hand-me-downs from a group home or random cast-offs. They meandered through the aisles, pausing to hold up different items for her approval. She hesitated a lot, unsure of her own taste, so Leonard simply offered suggestions. A pair of comfortable sneakers, a few t-shirts with bright designs, sturdy jeans, and a thicker jacket for chilly mornings. Once in a while, he caught her gazing at a more colorful piece, but she would move on quickly. It dawned on him that Rose might have learned to deny her own preferences, to never ask for anything she perceived as too expensive or frivolous. After he insisted she pick at least one shirt in her favorite color, she finally pointed to a soft green sweater. "Mom liked green," she said softly. Leonard nodded, placing it in the cart. He didn't press further about Beatrice, sensing that Rose still needed time before sharing more of her memories. It was enough for now that they acknowledged the woman who had brought this child into the world and somehow borne her struggles alone. At the register, the cashier rang up their items, giving Leonard a quick glance of recognition. He hoped she wouldn't make a fuss, and thankfully she didn't. She simply smiled at Rose and then handed over the bags. They made their way outside, where the drizzle had turned into a steady rain. The driver rushed to meet them with an umbrella. Rose blinked at the raindrops spattering across the pavement, seeming surprised by his courtesy. Leonard motioned for her to step beneath the canopy. "We'll go someplace warm," he said, guiding her toward the car. They settled into the back seat, shopping bags tucked at their feet. "Thank you," she said quietly, though the sincerity in her eyes spoke louder than words. He rested a hand on the seat between them, not wanting to startle her with too much closeness. "You're welcome," he answered. "I hope you like them." She nodded, the spark of a small, grateful smile curving her lips. That fleeting smile felt like a reward for all he'd been struggling through over the last 24 hours. He found himself smiling, too. Outside, the rain blurred the city's outlines. But inside the car, an odd sense of calm descended, almost like the hush after a storm's first fury. When they arrived at a small cafe, the driver parked discreetly, and Leonard led Rose inside. The interior was rustic, with warm wooden floors, vintage posters on the walls, and the scent of fresh coffee in the air. It was the kind of place Leonard had rarely visited in his high-powered lifestyle. Ironically, it felt perfect for a quiet lunch away from prying eyes. They chose a booth in the back, away from the window, and a young server handed them menus. Rose looked overwhelmed, scanning the many choices. Leonard gently leaned across the table. "They have soup, sandwiches, pasta, anything you're craving?" She shrugged. "Soup might be nice," she offered timidly. He nodded, ordering a bowl of chicken noodle soup for her and a turkey sandwich for himself. As they waited, he noticed the flicker of curiosity crossing her expression. She seemed to be observing everything from the shape of the light fixtures to the chalkboard listing daily specials. In the quiet, Leonard decided to open up a little, hoping to set her at ease. "I didn't grow up in wealth," he said. "My family wasn't poor, but we didn't have a lot. My parents worked hard. Then when I got older, I studied computer science and started my own business. It grew faster than I ever expected. Rose listened, head tilted slightly. I knew you were rich, she said almost apologetically. Mom showed me an old newspaper clipping once. I just didn't think, I never imagined meeting you. Her voice carried a bittersweet edge. Leonard let that sink in. I wish I'd known you existed, he said, voice thick with regret. No matter what was happening with my work, I wouldn't have ignored you if I had known. She traced her fingers along the condensation on her water glass. Mom never told me why she didn't say anything. She just said you had important things to do. Her eyes darted up to his. I used to make up stories in my head, like maybe you were off saving the world or something. It was easier than thinking you just didn't care. The raw honesty of her words gripped him like a vice. He swallowed, forcing down a surge of guilt. I do care, he whispered, and from now on, I promise to show you that. Their food arrived, and for a few minutes, they ate in relative silence. The soup's steam rose in gentle curls, and Leonard noticed that Rose looked more comfortable with every spoonful. She even tried a bite of his sandwich when he offered, and a faint giggle escaped when he teased her about the giant slurp of soda she took. It felt like the start of something tentative, like father and daughter forging a new language of ordinary moments. When they finished, Leonard paid the bill, and they stepped back into the damp afternoon air. The sidewalk glistened, reflecting the subdued daylight. He checked his phone, noticing missed calls from Camille. Anxiety welled in his chest. He owed her a conversation, perhaps an explanation of where he stood now that Rose was part of his life. Sensing Rose's mood shift too, he placed a steady hand at her back. "We're going to see Camille soon," he said gently. "She wants to talk. Are you okay with that?" Rose's brow furrowed. "I guess so." She paused, pressing the tip of her shoe against a puddle. She was really pretty in her wedding dress. Leonard remembered the elegance of that moment, Camille descending the aisle, only to be halted by Rose's unexpected arrival. "She is," he agreed quietly. "Let's just see how she's doing. She might have questions for you and for me." Rose nodded, though she looked apprehensive. He understood her fear. From her perspective, Camille was the woman whose wedding had been disrupted, potentially threatened by Rose's existence. Yet he hoped Camille's kind heart would shine through, that the two might find a path toward acceptance. They climbed back into the waiting car. As they pulled onto the rainy streets, Leonard's thoughts churned. He knew that balancing Rose's needs with Camille's feelings would be complicated. Still, he refused to believe it was impossible. He glanced at Rose, who stared out the window, hugging her new green sweater across her lap. She caught him looking and offered a shy half-smile. He returned it, silent but determined. Whatever challenges loomed in the days ahead, public scrutiny, legal questions, personal doubts, he wouldn't turn away from them. The timid light in Rose's eyes convinced him that forging a family, albeit one born of unexpected twists, could be the most important work of his life. Before going on, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. They drove in relative silence for the first few minutes, with Rose leaning her head against the window, watching the rain-swept streets blur by. Every so often, Leonard caught her expression in the reflection, a thoughtful crease in her brow, a hint of apprehension in her eyes. He wanted to reach out, to reassure her that everything would be okay, but he wondered if words could erase the scars left by uncertainty and loss. Instead, he settled for a gentle question. "You holding up?" She gave a slight nod, her breath fogging the glass. It wasn't exactly a yes, but he chose to take it as a hopeful sign. They arrived at a private apartment building on the edges of downtown, where Camille had agreed to meet them. The property belonged to one of Camille's longtime friends, a quiet place shielded from reporters. Leonard helped Rose gather her new shopping bags, then guided her out of the car. A drizzling mist still clung to the air. Rose kept close, fiddling with her backpack strap. Her grip on the bag was tight, as though it contained the only familiar pieces of her past. He offered her a small smile, and she managed one in return. They entered the lobby, a cozy space with potted plants and warm lights. A security guard, alerted to Leonard's arrival, waved them through. At the far end of the hallway, they found a door slightly ajar. Camille's voice reached them before they even stepped inside, low and measured, as if she was in conversation with someone else. Pushing the door open, Leonard spotted her standing near a kitchenette. She wore casual clothes, a simple blouse and slacks, rather than the bridal elegance of yesterday. The relief that washed across her features when she saw them brought a lump to Leonard's throat. Camille ended her call and set her phone aside. "You made it," she said gently. Her eyes flicked to Rose. "Hey there. How are you?" Rose seemed to shrink back, unsure, though she attempted a polite, "Hi." Camille moved carefully, as though approaching a timid animal. She gestured toward a small dining area where 3 chairs clustered around a round table. "Come, sit. I was just making tea. Would you like something, Rose? Juice, soda, hot chocolate?" "Hot chocolate," Rose repeated softly, brightening a fraction. Camille smiled. "Sure. Let me see what I've got." She glanced at Leonard, who slipped off his jacket and draped it over a chair. He felt a rush of gratitude for her kindness. Their postponed wedding was still a reality, yet she was pushing that aside to focus on Rose. It made him admire her even more, though he also recognized the sadness pinching the corners of her eyes. They settled at the table. Rose placed her bags at her feet, as though ready to leave at any hint of conflict. Camille prepared a mug of hot chocolate while Leonard quickly explained their morning. He recounted how they slipped out of the hotel, found clothes for Rose, grabbed lunch at a small cafe. "The good news," he added, "is that we dodged most of the reporters." At that, Camille exhaled, relieved. "The speculation has been intense," she admitted. "People are conjuring wild theories about you, me, and everything." Rose watched this exchange in silence. Her eyes flitted from Camille to Leonard. The tension in her small shoulders suggested she expected an argument at any moment, some adult confrontation about whose life she had disrupted. Camille must have sensed it too, because she placed the mug carefully in front of Rose, then sat. "Rose," she said gently, "I'm sorry if yesterday felt scary or confusing. I promise I'm not upset with you." Rose's cheeks reddened. "I didn't want to ruin anything," she whispered. "I didn't know he was getting married. I had nowhere else to go." Leonard reached over and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Camille offered a compassionate nod. "You're going through a lot," she said. "I understand. And Leonard and I both want you to feel safe. That's our main concern." A small silence wrapped itself around them, broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator. Finally, Leonard cleared his throat. "We have a lot to figure out," he began, glancing at Camille. "What happens with the wedding, my responsibilities as Rose's father, and how that intersects with your life, with our life." Camille folded her hands on the table. "I've been thinking about that nonstop since last night," she admitted. "I won't lie. I'm overwhelmed. But I also know that you, Leonard, are the kind of man who'll take care of his own. I respect that." Rose stared into her hot chocolate, absorbing the conversation. Leonard recognized the apprehension swirling in her silence. "Rose," he said softly, "I can't undo the fact that I didn't know about you before. But now that I do, I want to give you a home, a real one. Not a shelter, not a foster arrangement. My home. Our home if Camille and I still plan to share it." He glanced at Camille, whose expression turned serious. "We haven't talked about details," she cautioned. "But yes, if we're going to be a family, we have to consider what that looks like for all three of us." Rose's gaze lifted. "So, you're not mad that you have to share him with me?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. Camille blinked, as though caught off guard by such a question. "No," she said softly. "I'm not upset about sharing him. I was surprised, maybe even shocked, but that doesn't mean I want you gone." For a moment, the weight of the moment pressed in on them. Rose clutched the mug with both hands, as though it offered warmth that went beyond the steam rising from the drink. She looked as if she might cry, but instead she bit her lip to keep it together. "Mom told me he was a good person," Rose said. "She just said she couldn't tell him about me. She never explained why." Leonard's throat constricted, recalling the free-spirited Beatrice who slipped out of his life without warning. She'd left him with so many questions. Camille's voice drew him back. "We might never fully know her reasons," she said, "but that doesn't change the fact that you're here now, and that Leonard wants to take care of you." She glanced at Leonard, and he saw the unspoken question in her eyes. "And what about me?" The wedding they had carefully planned, the life they envisioned, was up in the air. Yet her composure held. She was giving him space to do what he needed to do for Rose, and that quiet generosity touched him more than any speech could. They spent the next hour in gentle conversation. Rose spoke hesitantly about her mother's final months, how she faded so quickly that Rose had barely grasped she was dying. She talked about the group home, the bunk beds crammed into small rooms, the older kids who sometimes picked on her. Leonard felt each description like a punch to the gut. He wished he could have been there to shield her, to provide a stable and comforting life that a father should. Camille asked a few questions, always careful to keep her tone gentle. No judgments, just concern. Eventually, the conversation turned to logistics. Leonard knew he had to contact a lawyer not only to handle the adoption or guardianship process, but also to navigate the swirl of public speculation. He had to consider the possibility that someone might contest his custody, though he couldn't imagine who. Rose's extended family, if any existed, had never come forward. For now, she seemed to have no one but him. Camille rubbed her temples, admitting she was exhausted. "We probably need some time to process," she said, giving Leonard a meaningful look. "Not just me, Rose too, and you." Leonard nodded. "Agreed. What if we find a quieter place outside the city for a few days? I can have my staff manage the media inquiries while we focus on figuring out how to move forward." Camille tilted her head. "You want to go now?" He shrugged. "Maybe tomorrow, or as soon as possible. It's not good for Rose to be hounded by reporters. A weekend somewhere peaceful might be the best thing for her, for all of us." Rose looked up with timid interest. "Where would we go?" Leonard gave her a small, reassuring smile. "I have a property near the coast. Nothing extravagant, just a retreat space I use sometimes to get away from the city. We could stock up on groceries, watch movies, and talk without cameras lurking outside." Camille considered this, then nodded slowly. "I think that's a good idea. I can rearrange my schedule for a few days, and it might help all of us breathe." They agreed to finalize the plan that evening. For now, Rose was yawning, the emotional toll clearly weighing on her. Camille set up a spare bedroom in the apartment, guiding Rose gently by the hand, pointing out fresh linens and a small dresser where she could put her clothes. Rose clutched her new shopping bags along with that ever-present backpack, glancing at Leonard as if to ask, "Are you sure it's okay for me to stay here?" He nodded, and she finally cracked a weary smile. She disappeared into the bedroom, shutting the door with a softness that spoke to her careful, apologetic nature. In the living area, Camille and Leonard faced each other. A swirl of unspoken feelings hovered between them. He took a cautious step closer. "I know this isn't easy," he said quietly. "Thank you for being so patient." Camille let out a trembling breath. "I love you," she whispered. "That's not going to just vanish because of an unexpected child. It changes things, but it doesn't erase how I feel." Relief flooded him. He placed his hands gently on her arms, resisting the urge to pull her into a tight embrace. He didn't want to assume everything was fine, yet he needed her to feel how grateful he was. "I promise," he said, "I will find a way to build a life for the three of us, if you'll still have me." She reached up, brushed her fingers along his collar. "We can't force it," she said softly, "but we can try." The acceptance in her eyes steadied him. Leaning close, he pressed a light kiss to her forehead, a silent vow of his commitment. Outside, the weather continued its dreary drizzle, but in that moment, Leonard felt a flicker of warmth, as if the darkest clouds had parted just enough to let hope through. Late that evening, Leonard quietly checked on Rose. He found her asleep, curled on her side, the photograph of Beatrice resting on the bedside table. Even in slumber, her expression held a trace of worry. He stood there, heart twisting, feeling the enormity of the changes that had swept through all their lives. Each of them, Rose, Camille, and himself, had been thrust into a world they never expected. Yet as he watched Rose breathe, he found resolution forming. He would navigate these uncertainties, answer the hard questions, and protect this child who had bravely sought him out. Whatever tomorrow brought, he would not fail her again. Before going on, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Leonard awoke at dawn the next morning, his mind already stirring with plans. The apartment was still, a hush broken only by distant traffic outside. He stood near the window, gazing down at the city, while the sky lightened from charcoal gray to a subtle pink. Despite the uncertainty and tumult of the last few days, he felt an unexpected clarity. Rose was in his life now, and he needed to do right by her. He also wanted to preserve his bond with Camille, to show her that their future did not have to crumble under the weight of an unforeseen child. There were no perfect answers, but there was the chance to try. He heard soft footsteps and turned to see Camille slipping into the living area, still wearing the same casual clothes as the day before. She rubbed her arms as though chilly. "Morning," she said quietly. Her expression was tentative yet kind. He offered a slight smile in return. For a moment, they lingered in silence, neither sure how to resume the conversation that had paused overnight. Finally, Camille inhaled, lifting her gaze to meet his. "I've been thinking about your retreat idea," she said. "Maybe a little distance from the city will help Rose feel safer, and it could help us figure out what comes next." Leonard nodded. "That's exactly what I was hoping," he replied. He eased closer to her, lowering his voice so as not to wake Rose. "We can leave later this morning if you're ready. I can have a car bring us around the outskirts, avoid the paparazzi. Then we'll head east to the coast." Camille looked thoughtful. "I'll need to pick up a few things from my place, but I can do that quickly. Let's plan to leave by mid-morning." They shared a fragile moment of agreement, and Leonard felt a faint stir of relief. He reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Thank you," he murmured, "for staying, for caring." She squeezed back, her eyes glinting with emotion. "We'll take this day by day," she said. "We owe ourselves that chance." Soon Rose emerged from the spare bedroom, her hair in slight disarray. She clutched the photograph of her mother, as though it were a passport to each new place. When she saw Camille and Leonard standing close, a flicker of unease crossed her features, perhaps a worry that she was intruding. But Camille beckoned gently. "Come have breakfast," she said. "We were thinking of heading out of the city for a little while, somewhere quieter. Would you be okay with that?" Rose hesitated by the table, searching their faces for signs of resentment or conflict. Seeing none, she nodded. "I'd like that," she whispered. Her eyes held a guarded hope. Leonard could imagine how difficult it was for her to trust that this wasn't temporary, that he wouldn't vanish like so many fleeting promises in her short life. He resolved to show her otherwise. Camille scrambled eggs on a small stove while Leonard toasted bread and poured orange juice. It was a simple meal, but to Rose it seemed almost luxurious. She ate quietly, occasionally glancing at the window as if anticipating an ambush of flashing cameras. After they finished, Leonard explained that they'd drive in his SUV, tinted windows providing them some privacy. Rose listened with an air of attentiveness that reminded Leonard she was probably used to being responsible for herself. She asked no questions, but her knuckles tightened around her backpack strap. By 9:30 they were ready. Camille stepped out briefly to retrieve her bag from her friend's unit down the hall. Meanwhile, Leonard guided Rose downstairs, accompanied by a security guard who kept them shielded from any lurking journalists. The building's rear exit led to a narrow alley where his SUV waited, engine running. Rain still tapped gently on the pavement, but it was a lighter drizzle than the day before. Leonard opened the back door for Rose, and she slid in with a small whisper of thanks. He settled in beside her while Camille took the front passenger seat. The security guard offered a curt nod, then closed the door, leaving them enclosed in a bubble of tinted glass and uncertain optimism. As they pulled onto the road, Leonard directed the driver to avoid the major thoroughfares, hoping to sidestep most of the paparazzi traps. Camille stared at her phone, occasionally relaying short updates to someone, likely her assistant or her parents, so that they wouldn't worry. Rose simply watched the city fade behind them, hugging the backpack to her lap as if it were a lifeline. Nobody spoke much, each lost in separate thoughts. Yet there was a strange comfort in simply being together, bound by the knowledge that they were taking the first step out of chaos. An hour later, the sprawl of skyscrapers yielded to quieter suburbs, and soon after, a gentle coastal highway curved to reveal glimpses of the ocean. Gray-white clouds mirrored in the water, and the breeze carried the faint tang of salt. Rose pressed her nose to the glass, eyes widening. "It's so big," she murmured. Leonard smiled at her reflection. "We can walk on the beach later," he said. "You'll see how the waves roll in." They turned off onto a private lane lined with tall pines and patches of dune grass. At the end stood a modern house with panoramic windows that opened to a sweeping vista of the Atlantic. The structure was neither overly large nor ostentatious. It had always felt like a secret retreat for Leonard during times of stress. The driver parked in the gravel driveway, and Leonard stepped out first, surveying the property. No unfamiliar vehicles were around, no sign of media presence. Relieved, he helped Rose down from the car, her new sneakers crunching on the gravel. Camille retrieved her overnight bag, slinging it over one shoulder. She gazed at the house, lips parted in mild awe. Though she and Leonard had visited here once for a weekend trip, it still felt like a privileged oasis from city life. "I'll get the door," Leonard said, fishing out a set of keys. He led them inside, flipping on overhead lights that illuminated an open living space, slate floors, comfortable couches, and floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the rolling ocean. The hush of the waves outside created a natural lullaby. Rose blinked, astonished. "Welcome," Leonard said softly. Rose dropped her backpack onto a chair, her gaze darting around as though she suspected the place might disappear if she blinked too hard. Camille set her bag down and walked to one of the windows, pressing a palm lightly against the glass. "You can hear the surf," she remarked. Indeed, the gentle roar reverberated through the house, soothing in its constancy. Leonard exhaled, feeling some of his tension dissolve. "I keep it stocked with basics," he explained. "We've got groceries in the pantry, extra bedding upstairs, everything we need." Then he turned to Rose. "Would you like to pick a room? There are a few upstairs. This is your home for as long as you want it." Her cheeks flushed, and she nodded, casting a hesitant glance at the stairs. Sensing her nervousness, Camille stepped forward. "Let me show you around," she offered, reaching out a hand. Rose hesitated before taking it. Together, they climbed the wooden steps, disappearing from view. Leonard lingered a moment, letting the stress of the city slip away. The sea breeze filtered through the house's ventilation, carried a crispness that reminded him of simpler times, well before Harrington innovations dominated his life. Now everything had changed again, but in a way that felt less lonely. He thought of Rose's wide eyes, of Camille's unwavering presence. A flicker of gratitude stirred in him. This was hard, yes, but it might also be the greatest blessing he'd ever known. A few minutes later, he heard footsteps return. Camille gave him a small nod, signifying that Rose had chosen a room. The girl appeared at the top of the stairs, glancing around. "It's nice," she said. "Big, but nice." Leonard went over to the kitchen counter, where a coffee maker and a kettle sat. "How about we settle in? Maybe make some snacks," he suggested. "We can talk about whatever we need to, or just take a break. Whatever feels right." Rose nodded shyly. Camille slipped off her shoes and padded across the living area. She still wore that guarded expression, but something about the house's ambiance seemed to soften her edges. "I'll make some tea," she said. "Rose, any preference? We have herbal, peppermint." The girl considered, then shrugged. "Peppermint, I guess." Her voice was quiet, but less strained than before. Leonard took that as a hopeful sign. They spent the afternoon in a slow, unhurried rhythm. Leonard showed Rose the small deck overlooking the shore. Despite the continued drizzle, she ventured outside, enthralled by the sweep of waves as far as her eyes could see. She asked questions about the house, why it was built with so many windows, how often he came here, whether he ever went swimming in the cold waters. He answered each inquiry patiently, feeling an odd delight in her curiosity. Camille joined them, carrying mugs of tea, pointing out passing ships or the occasional cluster of seagulls. When the drizzle subsided, they ventured down a wooden path that crossed a patch of dune grass and led straight to the beach. The sand was damp beneath their shoes, and the sky hung low and gray. Rose tentatively approached the surf, letting the water lap around her ankles. She lifted her arms slightly, as if to balance, as tiny waves broke. Camille and Leonard stood back a little, giving her space. From behind, Leonard noticed a tension in Camille's posture, as though she carried questions too large for words. He slid a hand against her back. "Thank you," he murmured. She closed her eyes for a beat, inhaling the ocean air. "We have a lot to figure out," she replied, voice low. They allowed Rose a few minutes to soak in the sea's calm before gently guiding her back. Nightfall would come early under such a cloudy sky, and Leonard intended to cook them dinner. He was no gourmet chef, but he could manage pasta and salad plus some fresh bread if the pantry still had flour. Inside, Camille helped him gather ingredients, while Rose wandered the living area, gingerly examining pictures on the wall, photos of sunsets over the water, occasional shots of Leonard and his business associates from past retreats. None included Beatrice or Rose, of course. That life existed in some separate timeline he had never even known he was living parallel to. By dinner time, the three of them sat around the wooden dining table in soft light. The conversation was halting but warm. They discussed trivial things: the best way to boil pasta, how loud the seagulls were, whether the weather might clear by tomorrow. No mention yet of lawyers, custody papers, or what it meant for their postponed wedding. Leonard knew those topics would have to surface soon, but he sensed everyone needed a reprieve from the clamor of major decisions. If only for a single evening, they could pretend life was simple. When the meal ended, Camille offered to clean up, gently insisting that Leonard and Rose rest. Rose gazed across the room, then ventured over to the wide windows, gazing out at the darkening sea. Leonard approached quietly. "Do you miss your mother a lot right now?" he asked, voice gentle. She nodded, fiddling with a loose thread on her sweater. "Sometimes I forget she's gone. I see something she would have liked, and I think I should tell Mom about that. Then I remember." Her voice trailed off. Leonard's throat tightened. "It's okay to feel that way," he said. "Losing someone is never easy." He paused, unsure if it was too soon, but he added, "I hope in time we can talk about her. I'd like to know more about who she was." Rose wiped at her eyes. "She was funny," she whispered. "She told me stories about all the places she wanted to photograph, but she got sick, and that was that." Leonard gently rested his palm on her shoulder. The ache in his chest for this child's sorrow was almost overwhelming, yet he sensed that the grief shared might bring them closer. He offered no more words, just a quiet presence. Later, Camille appeared, drying her hands on a dish towel. She saw Rose's red-rimmed eyes and must have sensed the conversation's weight. Coming over, she laid a comforting hand on Rose's other shoulder. "You know," she said softly, "it's okay to be sad. You've been through a lot in a short time." Rose nodded, eyes flicking between them. Then she managed a fragile smile. "Thank you, both." Night descended fully over the coast. The wind picked up, rattling the windows with a mild gust that carried the scent of brine. Leonard lit a single lamp in the living area, leaving the rest of the house in a cozy dimness. He proposed watching a movie, something lighthearted, to wind down. Rose agreed. Camille fetched blankets from a linen closet, and the three of them settled on a long couch facing a television. They chose a whimsical animated film that made Rose smile in places. She tucked her legs beneath her and leaned into a pillow, the tension in her posture slowly uncoiling. Leonard sat at one end, Camille at the other, with Rose in between, a small nucleus of uncertain family forging its first normal evening. By the time the credits rolled, Rose was blinking heavily, fighting off sleep. Camille murmured that she should head to bed, and the girl didn't protest, only gave a soft good night before shuffling to her room. Once the door clicked shut, Leonard and Camille exchanged a look, a silent confirmation that this day, at least, had gone as well as could be expected. Though worry still loomed about the path forward, they had given Rose a haven, if only for a little while. Before going on, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Leonard stayed on the couch for a time after Rose disappeared into her room, letting the hush of the house envelop him. The only light came from a single lamp on a side table, casting long shadows against the walls. Camille moved around the kitchen, wiping down the counter and switching off the overhead lights one by one. Finally, she stepped into the living area, hesitating near the couch. Their eyes met across the softly lit space, and for a moment, neither spoke. The day had been filled with tentative connections, shy smiles from Rose, and the slow dance of adjusting to what might become their new reality. But when all the motions of the day ended, a heavier quiet settled in, one that demanded honesty. Camille walked over and sank down on the cushion beside him. He could smell the faint hint of lavender hand soap on her skin, a comforting detail that reminded him of simpler times. Yet everything else felt tangled. They had come here to find relief from the press, to give Rose a sense of safety, but they both knew the road ahead was lined with questions they hadn't fully addressed. Camille drew up her legs and rested her chin on her knees. "She seems calmer here," she said quietly, as though afraid Rose might overhear. "This place is good for her." Leonard nodded, massaging the back of his neck. "I'm glad." The city felt suffocating. He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I still can't believe how quickly everything changed. 2 days ago we were standing at the altar, and now—" His voice trailed off, the weight of the unspoken obvious. Now they were in a borrowed moment of grace, with Rose's life braided into theirs. Camille reached out to lace her fingers through his. "You did the right thing," she told him gently. "She needs you." He looked at her in the dim light, touched by her support despite her own heartbreak. "I need you too," he admitted. "I'm trying to figure out how to be her father without losing us." They sat for a while longer, listening to the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. At length, Camille pressed a light kiss to his cheek and stood. "I'm exhausted," she murmured. "Let's talk more in the morning." He rose as well, following her upstairs. The home had several modest bedrooms, each with ocean-facing windows. She chose one at the far end of the hall, leaving him to the master suite. Before parting, she gave his hand a final squeeze. "We'll find our way," she whispered. He watched her close the door behind her, leaving him alone with the lingering hush of the night. In his own room, he lay awake for a time, mind roving through the myriad decisions awaiting him: a call to a lawyer about custody, a statement to the press, an honest talk with Camille about what it meant to move forward together. Yet overshadowing it all was an unexpected warmth, the sense that in embracing Rose he might finally be opening himself to a part of life he'd long neglected. Eventually, sleep came, deep and dreamless. Morning arrived with a fragile sunrise. Pale light crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the living area, revealing a sky streaked with tenuous pink. Leonard roused himself, rolling his shoulders to ease the stiffness from a half-restful night. He checked his phone, finding a flood of messages, from business associates, from distant relatives, and from well-wishers, uncertain if the wedding was postponed or canceled. For a moment, the magnitude of it threatened to pull him back into the fast-paced demands of the world he'd built. Then he glanced at the stairs, recalling that Rose was likely still asleep, and remembered why he was here. With a steadying breath, he opened his contacts and tapped the name of one of his trusted lawyers, Morgan Felton. The line rang several times before a crisp voice answered. "Morgan," Leonard began, stepping onto the deck to avoid disturbing Camille or Rose. "I need legal guidance regarding custody. There's a child, my daughter, though I never knew she existed until now." He paused, summarizing the situation with calm efficiency, though his heart pounded as he explained the basics. The mother's passing, the group home, Rose's sudden appearance. Morgan asked pointed questions, noting each detail with professional detachment. "All right," she finally said. "I'll need the birth certificate, any documents from the group home, and we'll see if there's any complication to taking custody. Do you anticipate a challenge from any other guardian?" Leonard inhaled the salty breeze, eyes on the distant curve of the ocean. "I don't know," he replied. "Rose said she has no other family, at least none she's aware of. But I want to make sure everything is done properly. She deserves stability." Morgan agreed to start the paperwork. By the time they finished, Leonard's anxiety had settled into a focused determination. The path might be complicated, but at least he had begun. When he re-entered the house, he found Camille awake, preparing coffee in the airy kitchen. She wore a soft robe, her hair tied in a loose braid, and her eyes followed him in a silent question. He summarized his call with Morgan, noticing the way her brow furrowed. "That's good," she said, but a trace of unease lingered in her voice. "Are you sure you want to handle custody alone? I mean, where do I fit?" Leonard understood the fear beneath her words. They'd planned to share a future as husband and wife, and now the reality of co-parenting, especially with a child that wasn't hers, was overshadowing that vision. "I want you fully involved," he said gently. "But I also don't want to pressure you. Rose is my responsibility first and foremost. If you need space, I understand." Her expression flickered with hurt. "Space doesn't mean I want out. I just want to do this in a way that doesn't feel forced." She fiddled with the coffee filter, then shook her head as if to dispel her own doubts. "Let's not dwell on it yet. One step at a time." They heard a soft thump on the stairs and turned to see Rose entering, hair tangled from sleep. She wore the green sweater from the day before, pulling it around her as though for courage. "Morning," she said, voice still husky. Camille gestured to the kitchen island, where a few croissants and fruit sat. "Hungry?" Rose nodded, slipping onto a stool. Leonard poured her a small glass of orange juice, remembering how she'd liked the juice at the apartment. The three of them shared a muted breakfast, accompanied by the steady pulse of the ocean outside. Now and then, Rose looked from Leonard to Camille, as if gauging whether they were in harmony. Camille made an effort to smile, to ask about Rose's night, and Leonard could see the girl inch closer to comfort. Afterward, they decided on a quiet beach walk since the rain had mercifully ceased. They donned jackets against the chilly wind and ventured onto the damp sand. Gulls wheeled overhead, and the surf crashed in a steady rhythm. Camille, wanting to give father and daughter a bit of time, hung back to collect seashells, while Leonard and Rose strolled near the water's edge. Rose tentatively let the waves swirl around her feet. "It's cold," she said with half a laugh, and Leonard couldn't help but grin. "You'll warm up," he replied. "If you get too chilly, we can head back." She seemed to gather her thoughts, then asked quietly, "Where do I go to school now?" The question stopped Leonard in his tracks. In the whirlwind of the last few days, he hadn't even considered the formalities of her education. "Well," he said, "we'll find a good school, one that fits you. Might be private, might be public. But let's settle the custody arrangement first. In the meantime, I'll make sure you're not falling behind." She nodded, worry knitting her brow. "I don't want to be a burden," she said. "It's just, I've never stayed in one place long enough." He gently rested a hand on her shoulder, the ocean breeze stinging his cheeks. "You won't be a burden, Rose. You never will be. I want you to have every chance you need." They continued walking, noticing that Camille had strayed ahead, scanning the shoreline for shells. Rose pointed at her, voice soft with curiosity. "Do you think she really wants me around, or is she just trying to be nice?" The question tugged at Leonard's heart. "Camille's not pretending," he said, glancing at the distant figure. "She's kind, and she's trying to figure out her own feelings. But she wants you to feel safe. I promise." Rose's gaze lingered on Camille's silhouette, then she nodded, letting the subject rest. They trudged through the damp sand until the wind picked up, prompting them to return to the house, where warmth and the aroma of brewing tea greeted them. Inside, Camille displayed her modest handful of seashells on the kitchen counter, a gesture that made Rose smile. As the day wore on, they fell into a quiet routine. Leonard and Camille huddled over laptops, each checking messages related to their respective work. He had to ensure his company continued smoothly in his absence, while she had to send reassuring emails to her law firm. Rose mostly kept to herself, exploring the house's nooks or reading one of the books from the small shelf in the living room. Now and then, Leonard paused to check on her, making sure she knew she wasn't forgotten. In late afternoon, they reconvened for a simple meal of sandwiches and tomato soup. Rose asked if she could help, so Camille guided her through slicing tomatoes and toasting bread. The sight of them standing side by side, carefully coordinating each step, gave Leonard an odd pang of gratitude. He set the table, aligning silverware and napkins with more care than usual, as if this small ritual could anchor them. The sky beyond the windows remained overcast, but the atmosphere inside held a gentle glow. Over dinner, Camille finally spoke about the wedding. "The tabloids are saying we broke up," she said, glancing between Leonard and Rose. "They're speculating all kinds of nonsense about me being furious or you being unfaithful." She rolled her eyes. "I know we can't control gossip, but we should release a statement at some point." Rose's eyes widened. "People think you broke up?" Camille offered a reassuring shrug. "That's what they do, but it's not true. We just postponed." Leonard exhaled, placing a comforting hand on Rose's forearm. "We'll straighten it out when we're ready," he said. Then he looked at Camille. "We could simply say we faced a private family matter and needed time." Camille nodded. "Yes, and the fewer specifics the better, until we're all settled." Relief flickered across her face. "I won't let them spin this into a circus any more than it already is." They lingered at the table after the plates were cleared, sipping cups of herbal tea in the low lamplight. Rose asked halting questions. What it was like running a company, how Camille became a lawyer, whether they enjoyed living in the city. Leonard and Camille took turns responding, each weaving their personal histories in a way that included Rose without overwhelming her. The gentle conversation reminded Leonard of how families might sit together after a long day, trading stories and building connections. For all the abruptness of Rose's arrival, there was a sweetness in these quiet moments, like a jigsaw puzzle piece slipping into place. Later, as night settled in, Leonard suggested a board game from a small cupboard near the TV. They chose a simple one, suitable for a young player, and ended up laughing over the silly twists and turns. Seeing Rose laugh, truly laugh, sparked an answering brightness in Leonard's chest. Camille joined in with playful competitiveness, her tension easing. For a short while, the complexity of their situation receded, replaced by fleeting togetherness that felt almost normal. When the clock nudged toward bedtime, Rose excused herself, stifling a yawn. She gave them both a soft good night, hugging her arms around herself as she disappeared upstairs. Leonard and Camille shared a private smile. The day had gone better than either could have hoped, though they remained aware of the larger issues waiting just beyond the circle of lamplight. Still, they had found a rhythm for now, a pattern of tentative bonding and mutual respect. Before turning in, Leonard and Camille stepped onto the deck. The wind had died down, leaving only the faint hush of the tide. The sky was too overcast for stars, but the darkness held a comforting embrace. Camille leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, feeling the warmth of her body through her jacket. She sighed, nestling closer. "I'm scared," she admitted softly, "but I want this to work." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I know," he whispered. "We'll make it work." In that quiet darkness, the sound of the ocean pulsing against the shore, Leonard felt something akin to hope. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with legal hurdles, personal adjustments, and the looming question of how to redefine their postponed wedding. Yet for now, Rose was safe upstairs, growing more comfortable by the hour, and Camille stood beside him, choosing to share both his burdens and his heart. If love was an act of will, of standing firm through life's storms, then they had taken their first steps together. He closed his eyes, letting the hush of the waves settle into his mind, determined to treasure every fragile, precious moment that bound them closer as a family. Before going on, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. The next day dawned with a thinner blanket of clouds, letting rays of pale sunlight filter into the house by the sea. Leonard woke early, still wrapped in the echo of ocean waves that had lulled him to sleep. Outside his bedroom window, gulls drifted lazily above the shoreline, their cries faint and distant. He rose quietly, dressed, and stepped into the hallway to find Rose's door closed. From across the corridor, he heard a faint stirring in Camille's room, but he decided to give them both the peace of a slow morning. Descending the stairs, he walked into the open living area and opened the drapes. The ocean looked calmer today, the tide lower, as if reflecting the cautious optimism in his own heart. Though the challenges of custody, publicity, and postponed wedding plans still loomed, a sense of tentative rhythm had emerged. He moved to the kitchen, filled the kettle for tea, and began rummaging for bread and eggs. If Rose was half as hungry as children often were in the morning, he wanted to be ready. He'd just cracked the first egg into a bowl when gentle footsteps announced Camille's arrival. She wore jeans and a soft sweater, her hair still a bit tousled. "Morning," she said, the corner of her mouth curving in a sleepy smile. "You're up early." Leonard placed the bowl on the counter. "Wanted to get breakfast started," he replied. "I thought maybe we'd do scrambled eggs and toast, unless you'd like something else." She shook her head, stifling a yawn. "That sounds perfect." The two worked together in easy cooperation, Leonard whisking eggs while Camille sliced bread, the mild scent of toasting grains filling the kitchen. It was a small, comforting routine, something that could have been part of a life they'd once imagined before Rose arrived, yet her presence had altered that vision, not erasing it but transforming it into something more complex. Camille set a pan on the stove, warming butter until it sizzled. "She seems to be sleeping better," she remarked, breaking the silence. "I didn't hear any nightmares last night." Leonard nodded, recalling Rose's tense expression the first night she'd stayed in a strange place. "She's been through so much," he said, stirring the eggs. "I keep worrying about what's beneath the surface. Grief for her mom, fear of losing whatever stability she might have now." Camille laid a hand on his arm. "She has you," she said softly. "And me, if she wants that. I think she's starting to believe it's real." They finished cooking and had just started setting the small dining table when Rose padded downstairs. She still wore her green sweater, her hair slightly messy, but there was a softness in her gaze that suggested she'd slept more soundly. "Good morning," she ventured, voice low. Leonard motioned to a chair. "Morning. We made eggs if you're interested." She nodded, slipping into the seat. Her movements, though cautious, carried less of that tense watchfulness. As they ate, Camille brought up the idea of heading into town later in the day, specifically to pick up some additional groceries and possibly let Rose choose more books or games. "We don't have to rush," she said, taking a sip of tea, "but a short drive might be nice. We can also find a quiet bookstore if you'd like." Rose brightened. "I like reading," she murmured, stirring her orange juice with a spoon. "Mom used to bring me lots of secondhand books." Leonard offered her a smile, pleased at her enthusiasm. "We'll do that then. We'll pick up anything else we need, maybe some ingredients for dinner." After breakfast, Camille offered to handle the dishes, giving Leonard time alone with Rose. He led her outside onto the deck, where weak sunlight revealed a shoreline still damp from lingering morning mist. "We can walk down again," he said, nodding toward the beach. She ventured a few steps, running her palm along the deck railing. "It's pretty," she remarked. "I never got to see the ocean much before." Her voice carried a note of awe. Leonard joined her by the railing, grateful for this chance to connect. "We'll see it as often as you like," he replied, letting the salt-tinged wind ruffle his hair. They made their way down the wooden path, the boards creaking softly underfoot. A scattering of seashells glistened on the sand, remnants of the tide. Rose stooped to pick one up, a spiral shell with pearly edges, and held it out as though it were a treasure. Leonard bent down to inspect it with genuine interest. "That's beautiful," he said. Maybe we can keep a little collection somewhere in the house." She tucked it into her pocket, her face momentarily brightening at the thought. When they returned, Camille was waiting by the front door, car keys in hand, a light jacket draped over her arm. "Ready whenever you are," she told them. Rose cast a quick glance at Leonard, seeking silent confirmation, and he nodded. "We won't go far," he assured her. "Just a little trip to the nearest town. It's small, quiet, no big crowds." She gathered her new jacket, the one they had purchased in the city, and slipped it on. The drive took them through winding roads lined by tall pines and small cottages. The ocean remained in sight for part of the route, then disappeared behind a curve of land. Eventually, they pulled into a cozy coastal town with a single main street. Quaint shops with painted signs offered crafts, antiques, and coffee. There was a modest bookstore near the end of the row, its windows displaying a hodgepodge of paperbacks and homemade bookmarks. Perfect, Leonard thought, for a low-key excursion that wouldn't attract prying eyes. They parked in a gravel lot, stepping out into the faint smell of brine mixed with fresh pastries from a nearby bakery. A couple of locals meandered past, paying them little attention. It was a relief not to be swarmed by curious onlookers or paparazzi. Camille took Rose's hand, leading her toward the bookstore entrance. Leonard followed, inhaling deeply as they stepped inside a space crammed floor to ceiling with books. The dusty warmth and faint whisper of background music gave the place an air of timelessness. Rose wandered cautiously at first, trailing her fingertips along the spines. A kindly shopkeeper, an older woman with silver hair, offered them a gentle smile, pointing out sections for children's literature. Rose murmured her thanks, drifting away into an aisle labeled Young Readers. Leonard and Camille exchanged a quick glance and followed at a respectful distance. The girl ran a hand across the shelves, occasionally pausing to read a summary or flip a few pages. It was the most relaxed Leonard had seen her. He felt a surge of warmth, recalling how a single book could spark wonder in a child's mind. Camille bent down to Rose's level. "Anything catch your eye?" she asked softly. Rose held up a novel about a girl who discovers a magical island. "It looks nice," she said, voice tinged with yearning. Camille nodded. "We can get that if you like." After a moment's hesitation, Rose glanced at Leonard. When he nodded, she added the book to her small pile. She'd gathered two more, a collection of short animal stories and a classic adventure novel. That simple scene, Rose's face flickering with cautious joy, stirred Leonard's heart more than any corporate milestone he'd ever achieved. At the register, Rose shifted from foot to foot, evidently torn between excitement and guilt. "You don't have to buy them if it's too expensive," she mumbled. Leonard raised an eyebrow, more amused than offended. "Books are never a waste," he said, paying the shopkeeper with a smile. Rose blinked, then clutched the bag with quiet gratitude. Outside, the sky had brightened, revealing a patch of watery blue. They strolled along the street, stopping briefly in a bakery where they shared a few pastries, still warm from the oven. Once they'd finished, they returned to the car, groceries and new books in tow. "We could head back," Leonard suggested. "We have enough to make something tasty for dinner." Camille agreed, buckling her seatbelt. "Let's do it. I can try out that pasta recipe I saw online." Rose sat in the back, reading one of her newly acquired books, occasionally tilting it to catch better light. The gentle lull of the car's motion seemed to cradle her in a sense of security she rarely showed in the city. The rest of the day passed in a pleasant routine, punctuated by small pockets of conversation. Camille and Leonard started dinner prep early, coaxing Rose to help rinse vegetables and stir sauce. They teased each other lightly, sharing half-jokes about who was the worst cook, and Rose gave a rare, unguarded laugh at their banter. As twilight fell, they carried plates to the table, the aroma of sautéed herbs filling the air. Through the windows, the ocean stretched into a softening sky. Over dinner, Camille broached the topic of schooling in more detail, encouraging Rose to share her favorite subjects. Rose admitted she liked reading and art, but math frustrated her. Leonard promised to find a tutor if needed, or perhaps a small school where she wouldn't feel lost in a crowd. The conversation drifted from there to the idea of setting up a bedroom for Rose back in the city, so she could have a permanent space. Each practical decision felt like another step in weaving her into their shared life. Darkness descended outside, the waves audible in the still air. After they cleared the dishes, Rose curled up on the couch with her new book, while Leonard and Camille retreated to the deck to watch the moonlit ocean. The hush of nighttime filled the space between them, but it wasn't empty. It was companionable, an invitation to reflect on the day. Leonard slipped an arm around Camille's waist, pulling her closer. She rested her head on his shoulder, letting out a slow exhale. "We're doing okay," she said softly, as though it was a discovery. Leonard kissed the top of her hair. "I think so too. Rose seems lighter somehow." Camille turned her face up to his. "You've given her a reason to believe she's not alone," she said. "That does wonders for a child who's lived on the edge of everything." He acknowledged her words with a nod, feeling a pulse of gratitude that Camille was choosing to stand beside him and this girl who had appeared so unexpectedly. The future was still unwritten, with no guarantee of smooth sailing. But each day spent here at this quiet retreat was building a foundation, and that for now was enough. They lingered outside until the air grew chilly, then went in to check on Rose. She had fallen asleep on the couch, the book splayed across her chest. A tender smile curved on Camille's lips as she crouched and gently brushed a stray lock of hair from the girl's cheek. Leonard picked Rose up carefully, mindful not to wake her, and carried her upstairs to her bed. She stirred only once, mumbling something incoherent, then burrowed deeper into the pillow. As he pulled the blankets around her, he wondered at the quiet trust she was beginning to show, letting him hold her like a father would. It sent a wave of fierce protectiveness coursing through him. Later, he and Camille parted for their separate bedrooms with soft goodnights. Lying awake, he mulled over the day's details and the bigger questions still looming. The custody papers Morgan was drafting, the public statement about the postponed wedding, and the emotional terrain of merging Rose into an almost marriage. Yet the memory of that small moment, Rose's laughter at the dinner table, the unguarded joy, kept him grounded. He turned on his side, listening to the muffled sound of waves. Tomorrow might bring new problems, but for now, he savored the realization that somehow in the midst of upheaval they were becoming a family. Before going on, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Leonard awoke on the third morning at the coastal house to the aroma of coffee drifting from downstairs. Outside his window, the sunrise painted the water with delicate hues of peach and rose, and he lingered for a moment, savoring the quiet hush before life stirred. The past few days had been an unexpected gift, time outside the city, away from the endless cameras, and a chance to create a fragile nest where Rose could feel sheltered. Yet he sensed that soon they'd have to return to the reality they'd left behind. He dressed and made his way downstairs to find Camille in the kitchen, scrolling through emails on her phone, while a steaming mug waited at her elbow. She looked up with a soft smile. "Morning. I heard from my firm. Things are calm enough that I can stay here a bit longer if we need it, though I'll have to deal with some cases by next week." She paused, searching his eyes. "What about you? Your board probably wants updates." Leonard exhaled, grateful for the warmth of her concern. "I've emailed them," he said, pouring himself coffee. "I explained I was handling personal matters, but would soon schedule a conference call." They might be restless, but they understand I'm not stepping away permanently. He took a sip and noticed Rose's absence. Still sleeping? Camille nodded. I think so. She stayed up reading. I peeked in on her around midnight and she was halfway through that adventure book. Her tone was fond, threaded with the gentle acceptance that had surprised him over the last few days. Despite the abrupt upheaval of their wedding, she had embraced Rose's presence with a grace he couldn't take for granted. They eased into a comfortable silence, punctuated only by the faint clink of a spoon against ceramic. Then Leonard cleared his throat, bracing himself for the conversation he knew they needed. I spoke to my lawyer again last night, he began, keeping his voice low. The custody paperwork is almost ready. All I have to do is confirm details, sign, and file it. She also mentioned scheduling a hearing or a straightforward process if there's no contest. Camille set her phone aside, focus sharpening. Do you anticipate a contest? She asked gently. Leonard shook his head. Not that I know of. There's no sign of other relatives, and Rose has nowhere else to go. The group home staff might require a formal interview, but that's it. He chewed his lip. I want to finalize it soon. I can't let her wonder about her future any longer. She deserves security. Camille reached across the counter, taking his hand in hers. I support you, she said simply. And if it's okay with Rose, I'd like to be present, at least informally. Not to overshadow anything, just to show that we're in this together. Emotion caught in Leonard's throat. She'd like that, he whispered. Thank you. A soft shuffle on the stairs told them Rose was awake. She appeared wearing the sweater she seemed to favor. Though it hung loosely around her small frame, her hair was ruffled, and she rubbed her eyes with the back of her hand. Hi, she murmured, sniffing the air. Coffee smells strong. Leonard grinned. I can make you cocoa or get you juice, he offered. She shrugged. Cocoa would be nice, I guess, but I can wait. She padded over to the couch, setting her book bag aside. The sight of her looking so at ease in this once lonely retreat made Leonard's chest ache with gratitude. Give me a minute, he said, moving to the cupboard where the cocoa mix lay. Camille caught his eye and offered an encouraging nod. While the water heated, Rose gazed out the wide windows at a sky that was finally clearing. It looks pretty today, she noted. Maybe we can see the sunset. Camille smiled. I'd love that. If the clouds keep moving off, the sun should dip right over the water tonight. It's gorgeous here in the evenings. Leonard handed Rose her cocoa, and she cradled the mug in small hands, inhaling deeply. They savored a peaceful lull, each sip underlining the quiet closeness that had grown between them. Rose's voice finally broke the silence. Are we going back soon? She asked, eyes flicking from Camille to Leonard. To the city, I mean. I don't mind staying here, but I know you both have stuff to do. Leonard set his coffee aside. We'll have to go back, yes. I need to sign some papers. Legal things to make sure you can stay with me for good. Her eyes widened. Like adoption papers? He nodded carefully. Yes, in a sense. Official custody. It's how I can protect you. She pressed her lips together, glancing at Camille. That means I won't have to live in a group home again? Camille shook her head, stepping forward. No. If everything goes as it should, you'll come home with us. The word home hung tenderly in the air, and Rose's shoulders relaxed, as though a heavy weight had lifted. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling. I was scared I'd have to go back. Leonard breathed out slowly, feeling that quiet vow settle into his heart. I know you were, he said, but that won't happen. Once the documents are official, you'll be with me, with us, and we'll figure out your school, your room, everything else. Rose sipped her cocoa, blinking tears away. Okay, she murmured. Okay. He saw a small flicker of faith in her eyes, perhaps the beginning of genuine trust. They spent the day tidying the house and talking in soft, measured tones about their impending return. The tension of re-entering the city pulsed in the background, but at least Rose knew the plan. Late in the afternoon, they packed their belongings into the SUV. Rose insisted on carrying her own bag, that battered backpack that held her few treasures. She also clutched the new books, reluctant to let them out of sight. Once the car was loaded, Camille lingered by the front door, turning to take in the wide windows and quiet deck. "I'll miss this place," she said softly to Leonard, who stood beside her. "It feels safe." He wrapped an arm around her waist. "We can come back whenever we need," he promised, "and maybe next time we'll bring fewer worries." Rose hovered on the path behind them, waiting in polite silence. They joined her, and after a final check, they pulled away. The winding road was bright under late afternoon light, the ocean flashing between stands of evergreens. This time, Rose pressed her face against the window, not in wariness, but in simple fascination with the scenery. Leonard glanced at her reflection and saw a small smile curving her mouth. He felt Camille's hand slip into his from the front seat, an unspoken affirmation. They reached the outskirts of the city near dusk, weaving through quieter streets to avoid any chance of paparazzi. Though the public frenzy might have died down slightly, Leonard didn't want to risk bombarding Rose with flashing cameras. He guided the driver to a high-rise he owned, a sleek building with secure underground parking. He'd decided not to return to his penthouse that very night, just in case reporters were still lurking. Instead, they'd stay in a furnished suite that could give them privacy, at least until morning. Once they arrived, security escorted them through a private elevator to the suite near the top floor. Rose's eyes widened at the luxurious interior, polished floors, modern furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows revealing the glittering skyline. "Whoa," she breathed, stepping gingerly onto a plush rug. Camille flicked on lamps, bathing the space in a soft glow. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass. "It's just for tonight," Leonard explained. "Tomorrow, I'll head to my lawyer's office, sign everything, and we can talk about the best place to settle in long-term. I have my penthouse, but if that doesn't feel comfortable, we can find somewhere else." Rose hugged her backpack, glancing from him to Camille. "Anywhere is fine," she said, "as long as I can stay." Leonard ruffled her hair gently, his voice thick. "You can stay," he vowed. "That's the point of all this." They shared a simple dinner, takeout from a nearby restaurant, then watched as Rose retreated to one of the bedrooms, the door left ajar. Camille and Leonard sat in the living area, finishing cups of tea. Through the windows, the city pulsed with nocturnal life, reminding them that they couldn't hide forever in coastal quiet. Camille traced the rim of her cup thoughtfully. "I was thinking," she began, "maybe we should issue that statement in a day or two, just to clarify the wedding isn't canceled and that we're addressing personal family matters." Leonard nodded, fiddling with a napkin. "I can draft something, or we can do it together. I just want to protect Rose from the onslaught of questions." Camille agreed, leaning back against the sofa cushions. "She doesn't need cameras shoved in her face, not after all she's been through. We'll phrase it respectfully. Keep details minimal." A wave of fatigue settled over them. "It'll be all right," he said quietly, repeating a phrase he'd uttered many times in the past few days. Yet somehow, each repetition steadied him more. The next morning arrived clear and bright. Leonard had arranged for Morgan, his lawyer, to finalize the paperwork by 10 o'clock. After a quick breakfast, he and Rose caught a ride to the law firm's building. Camille opted to remain at the suite, anticipating that the official documentation might be less confusing if done with fewer people present. As the car glided through the streets, Rose's fingers tightened around the seatbelt. Leonard offered her a reassuring glance. "Just some signatures," he said, "and you won't have to worry anymore." Morgan's office was in a modern skyscraper, but the waiting area was calm, furnished with simple chairs and potted plants. Rose huddled beside Leonard, scanning the room as though expecting trouble. Morgan soon appeared, greeting them with a professional smile. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington, Miss Rose. Ready?" Rose nodded, chewing her lip. They followed Morgan into a spacious conference room, where a neat stack of papers awaited on a sleek wooden table. Morgan explained the forms in language Rose could follow. These documents confirmed Leonard as her legal guardian, allowed him to make decisions for her welfare, and ensured she wouldn't be placed into the foster system again. Rose seemed to cling to every word. When Morgan finished, she asked a single question. "This means I can stay with him forever?" Morgan nodded kindly. "Yes, unless you decide otherwise, but no one can take you away against your will." Leonard looked at Rose, heart brimming with gratitude. He signed each form with careful strokes of the pen, then held her hand while she signed her name, shaky but determined. Once they'd finished, Morgan stamped them and gave an approving nod. "Congratulations," she said. "You're officially a family under the law." The words hung in the air. Rose stared at the papers, then at Leonard. Her lips trembled, and tears slipped down her cheeks. He knelt beside her chair, wiping them away gently. "We did it," he murmured, voice tight with emotion. Rose buried her face against his shoulder, small fingers clutching his jacket. He felt her relief, her fragile hope in every tremor. Morgan discreetly stepped outside, leaving them alone for a moment to absorb the enormity of the step they had just taken. By the time they left the office, Rose's tears had dried, replaced by a tentative glow in her expression. She held the official folder as though it were a priceless treasure. When they got back to the suite, Camille greeted them at the door, and Rose ran forward, not quite hugging her, but standing very close as though wanting to. "It's done," Rose blurted. Camille's eyes shone as she looked at Leonard, who nodded. "She's ours," he said. "I mean, she's my daughter, but we'll figure out the rest together." Camille didn't hesitate. She opened her arms and Rose leaned in, letting her hold her for an instant. It was a delicate embrace, but it spoke volumes. Leonard watched, heart surging with quiet elation. This was their future, one shaped by love, unexpected or otherwise. He stepped forward, placing a hand gently on Rose's back and meeting Camille's gaze over her shoulder. The three of them stayed that way, bound by a fragile unity that promised more than any ceremony or title could. Later that evening, after the day's excitement, they ordered a simple dinner and settled on the sofa to watch a movie, all of them leaning against one another in a comfortable sprawl. The city lights formed a luminous tapestry beyond the windows, but none of them bothered to look outside. This moment was enough. Rose's contented murmur as she curled between them, Camille's hand sliding into Leonard's, and the quiet hum of a new chapter beginning. Their family, formed in the most unexpected way, had taken its first resolute step forward together.